In the deepest folds of forgotten mountains, where the mist never clears and names are written in ash instead of ink, there are villages that do not appear on any map, places where tradition is older than time and silence is the only thing louder than truth. Welcome to FolkFear. Here we do not tell ghost stories. We relive ancestral warnings, rituals passed down through blood, bone, and shadows. Tonight's tale is not a legend. It is a curse still whispered by those who survived it. A village that offers daughters to the dead. A bride made of clay, and a vow no one dares break. This is the story of the clay bride of Sanfeng village. If you begin, you must listen until the very end, because some spirits bind themselves through sound. The morning fog in Sanfeng village does not rise with the sun. It coils around the crooked trees like old silk, drapes over broken rooftops, and whispers through the bamboo groves with breath too cold for any summer morning. It is always like this on the 7th day of the 7th month, and this time there is a bride. She walks barefoot along the cracked stone path, her steps soundless, her ankles streaked with mud. A red veil drapes over her face, so sheer it clings to the damp of her breath, but thick enough to hide what lies beneath. In her pale hands she carries a single lotus flower, wilted, dripping. Behind her the procession follows in silence. No drums, no laughter, no living music, only the shuffling of slippers over damp earth and the swaying of a single red umbrella held aloft by a hunched old man whose eyes are sewn shut with crimson thread. Under that umbrella is the groom, or what remains of him. He is made of clay, cracked, worn, and painted with a faint trace of red across the lips, as if someone had tried to give him life with pigment and prayers. His eyes are hollow. His hands are too long. In his chest, a faded jade amulet glows faintly from within the hardened clay, pulsing with a rhythm that does not belong to the living. The villagers line the path, their heads bowed, their mouths murmuring in a dialect no outsider would recognize. Some cover their mirrors with black cloth, others press inked talismans against their doors. A child cries, but is quickly silenced by a mother's trembling hand. No one dares look the bride in the eye, not even through the veil, because they know what she is. Not a girl, not anymore. She is the vessel now, the one who walks so the rest may breathe, the one who lies beside the dead so the earth won't split, the one who carries the curse. And yet, as the procession winds its way toward the ancestral hall at the edge of the forest, one thing is noticeably absent. There are no birds, not in the trees, not in the sky, not even in the distant hills. Even the crows have learned to fear the wedding day. At the entrance to the hall, incense sticks smolder low in cracked ceramic bowls. Their smoke curls into unfamiliar shapes, spines, claws, twisted faces, and disappears into the rafters. The elders stand waiting, all dressed in funeral white, all with salt sprinkled in their shoes. The clay groom is placed gently on a woven mat. The red umbrella is laid beside him, its edges stained with something darker than rain. And then the bride kneels. Her head bows until it touches the floor, 3 times. Once for the spirit, once for the ancestors, once for the forgotten gods who no longer answer. There is no priest, no chants, no written record, only a whispered prayer passed from elder to elder, spoken through teeth stained black with betel leaf. Take this soul and bind it tight, with earth and ash and jade and night, a bride in red, a groom of clay, so death may turn and walk away. And then silence. No wind, no footsteps, not even the sound of the trees moving, until the bride slowly stands and walks into the hall, alone. She does not look back, she does not speak, she does not cry. Because everyone in Sanfeng knows what happens to brides who break the silence. At the far end of the hall, past scrolls too faded to read and portraits with scratched-out eyes, lies the bridal chamber. It has no windows, only one bed, 2 pillows, one of earth, one of flesh. The clay groom is placed at the head of the bed, facing the door. The bride will sleep beside him for 3 nights. She must not speak, she must not wake, she must not look at him after midnight. Not until the ritual is complete, not until the spirit settles, not until the whispers in the walls stop crawling under her skin. Outside, the fog thickens. The villagers return to their homes in silence, doors shut, talismans nailed, bowls of uncooked rice placed at thresholds. The forest sways as if breathing in slow anticipation, and in the bridal chamber the red candle is lit. Its flame flickers against the clay face, and, in the darkness, the bride exhales. But it is not her breath that fogs the mirrorless room. The villagers say that Sanfeng is not a place, but a pact. A pact buried in the mountain's shadow, behind winding roads that no longer appear on maps, where telephone poles end abruptly and birds do not nest. It is a place that does not welcome strangers, or questions, or mirrors, especially mirrors. Li Lan learned that early. Her grandmother had told her stories since she was a child. Stories about reflections that steal souls, about old gods whose faces were too terrible to behold, and about spirits that follow you home through glass. But they were always told in hushed tones, near firelight, with salt scattered on the windowsill. Sitting on the worn bamboo floor of their dim, one-story house, Li Lan often wondered what else was being hidden behind all the veils. Because Sanfeng was veiled, in fog, in silence, and in tradition. So much tradition that no one really remembered the why, only the how. And the how was always followed. You never burn incense facing west. You never whistle after dark. You never step over grave soil. And you never, ever speak of the 7th month. Not openly, not even indoors. The houses in Sanfeng were wooden and old, built on sloped land that creaked with age. Most had curved eaves decorated with sun-bleached talismans, paper charms that fluttered without wind. Families still cooked over open fires. The power came and went, but no one seemed to mind. When the lights flickered out at night, no one lit candles. They just sat in the dark and waited. Waited for what? Li Lan never knew. She was 17 that year, too old to be told fairy tales, too young to be let in on secrets. But she was curious, and curiosity was a dangerous thing in Sanfeng. That morning, Li Lan noticed the old widow across the field, crouched in the dirt behind her house, digging. The woman was murmuring under her breath, her fingers clawing into the earth. Beside her lay a small red thread doll, wrapped in faded silk, its face drawn in charcoal. The widow placed it carefully into the shallow hole and began to cover it with soil. Not a word was said. No prayer, no incense, just dirt and silence. Li Lan watched from behind a cracked wooden shutter, heart thudding. She had seen similar dolls before, sometimes buried at crossroads, other times hidden inside urns behind the shrine. She once found one wrapped in a rotting lotus leaf behind the schoolhouse, its limbs bent at impossible angles. When she asked her grandmother, the old woman slapped the back of her hand and told her it was none of her business. The dead, she said, should not be meddled with. Later that afternoon, Li Lan walked to the communal well to fetch water. The fog hadn't lifted all day. It hung in the air like breath that couldn't be exhaled. As she passed by the elder's house, the one with the 9 rusted locks on the front gate, she heard chanting. Low, raspy, like someone was gargling gravel. She stopped, cautiously peeking through the wooden slats in the gate. Inside the courtyard, 3 men were standing in a circle. All wore white, all barefoot. One held a bowl of dark liquid, ink or blood she couldn't tell, and dipped his fingers in, painting symbols on the stone floor. Another held a clay tablet, etched with what looked like ancient writing, and was rocking back and forth. The third stood still, face tilted to the sky, mouth wide open, silent. They didn't see her, or pretended not to. Li Lan backed away, her heartbeat pounding against her ribs like warning drums. When she returned home, her grandmother was already waiting. Sitting in her usual spot beside the hearth, braiding together sprigs of mugwort and strands of horsehair. "You should not have gone near the elder's house," the old woman said without looking up. "I was just passing. Just passing is how the foolish meet their ancestors early." Li Lan said nothing. Her eyes dropped to the talismans pasted above the doorframe. There were 5 today, not 3. Fresh ink, still wet. "Why are there no mirrors in this village?" she asked suddenly. Her grandmother stiffened. The braid in her hands stopped halfway. "Mirrors reflect what should remain unseen, and sometimes what stares back is not your own." "But how do you know what you look like?" "You don't need to know what you look like. You only need to know who you are." "And who am I?" The old woman's eyes, clouded with age but sharp with fear, looked up slowly. "You are the firstborn. That is enough to be afraid of." That night, Li Lan couldn't sleep. The silence felt heavier than usual. Even the frogs had stopped singing. The wind outside had a wheezing sound to it, like someone breathing through broken reeds. She got up and tiptoed to the back room. It was where her grandmother kept her old trunk, lacquered black with red binding and locked with a rusted clasp. Li Lan had picked the lock before. She did it again now. Inside were bundles of old clothes, yellowed letters, and beneath them, a cracked hand mirror wrapped tightly in black silk. Her breath caught. Carefully, she unwrapped it. The glass was aged, darkened at the edges. The reflection was blurred, warped like something submerged under water. But she saw her face, pale, tired, slightly trembling. And behind her, a shape. Small, barely there, like wet handprints on glass. She spun around. Nothing. She looked back at the mirror. Nothing. She rewrapped it, her fingers shaking. She did not tell her grandmother. Instead, she lay in bed with her back against the wall, watching the door until her eyes could no longer stay open. And in her dreams, she walked through the village, not in daylight, but in a moonless black, the houses empty, the doors open, the red thread dolls standing upright in the fields, whispering without mouths. And always, always, someone was walking behind her. The next morning, the widow who had buried the doll was found dead in her courtyard, kneeling, still, eyes missing. In her lap sat the same red thread doll, now wet with something dark. Its head had turned, and in the sky above the mountains, the crows circled, but not one landed, not in Sanfeng. There was a building in Sanfeng village that no one spoke about, though everyone knew it existed. It sat behind the old shrine, half sunken into the hillside, overgrown with wild moss and choking vines. No path led to it, no incense was ever burned near its door, and though the villagers never said its name aloud, they called it many things under their breath. The kiln house, the clay room, the bride's tomb. Li Lan found it by accident, or perhaps, as she would later wonder, it found her. It began with a sound, a dull, rhythmic thud, like fingers tapping wood from inside a wall. She was on her way back from the creek that afternoon, carrying a bamboo basket of river herbs her grandmother had requested. The fog was lighter than usual. The sun, though dim, filtered weakly through the clouds, casting a pale orange glow across the slanted rooftops. Then came the sound again. Tap, tap, tap. Not from ahead, not from behind, but from beneath. She followed it, past the temple drums that hadn't been played in years, past the elders' compound with its rotting talismans, past the grave mounds that had no names, only red stones marking their heads, until she reached a wooden door, sunken slightly into the ground, nearly hidden behind a collapsed fence. Half buried beneath soil and vine, it looked more like a trapdoor than an entrance. The thudding stopped. Curiosity tugged at her like an invisible hand. Her heart told her to turn away, but her fingers were already reaching out, brushing against the rotted wood. The door creaked open with a soft groan, exhaling a gust of cold, stale air. Inside, it was darker than night. The smell hit her first, damp earth, burned ash, and something else, the thick, metallic tang of dried blood baked into clay. She stepped inside. The walls were covered in carvings, spirals, talismans, old Taoist symbols drawn in soot. Bones of old offerings littered the corners. In the center of the room stood a long wooden table lined with rows of unfinished clay effigies. Some were broken, torsos split, limbs missing. Others had faces, barely molded, with wide smiling mouths and hollow eyes. A few had jade beads embedded in their chests, partially melted into the clay like tumors of green glass. They were all life-sized, every one of them. Some male, some female, some not human at all. Li Lan felt something in her throat, not fear, not yet, but a kind of pressure, like her own silence, had thickened around her. The air was heavy here, wet, like the room was still breathing, just barely. Then she heard it, a whisper, not in her ears, but in her skull. Low, gritty, ancient. It said her name. Twice. She turned sharply. No one was there, but the door behind her had closed. The clay figures were no longer still. One of them, the one near the back, had shifted. Just slightly, enough for its head to tilt. Enough for her to run. She burst from the kiln house, nearly dropping her basket. She did not look back until the door was shut. Her lungs burned, her legs trembled, but something deeper ached, a knowing, cold and certain. That place was not empty. It had never been empty. And now it knew her name. That night she did not sleep. The whispers had followed her home, not as voices in her ears, but in dreams that weren't dreams. She saw the kiln again, lit by red candles. The clay figures danced in slow, broken movements. A man with no skin stood in the center, cradling a red veil in his hands. He smiled without lips, and then, without speaking, he pressed a finger to his chest. There was a jade stone lodged there, beating faintly. He opened his chest with both hands, and inside was not a heart. It was a tiny clay bride, shaped like her, veiled, still, waiting. She awoke screaming. Her grandmother was already sitting by the hearth, grinding mugwort into paste. "The spirits are restless," the old woman said calmly. "The 7th month grows close. The veil between the worlds is thin. Keep your doors locked. Do not open them, even if you hear someone call your name." She said nothing. She simply nodded, but inside, something had cracked. Later that day, she returned to the kiln, not out of courage, but compulsion, like something was pulling her back, threading itself through her breath. She brought salt, iron nails, a string of garlic cloves, every protection she could carry. But when she reached the kiln house, the door was already open. Inside, the clay figures were no longer where they had been. They had moved, now arranged in a perfect circle. And in the center was something new. A fresh lump of clay, still wet, still steaming, shaped roughly like a man, head bowed, arms at his side. And on his chest, embedded deep, a jade amulet, still glistening with blood. Beside it, a red bridal veil folded neatly, as if waiting for someone, as if expecting her. Li Lan backed away slowly, then ran. This time she did not stop, not even when her legs gave out and she fell hard against the stone steps of the shrine. She crawled the rest of the way home, not daring to look over her shoulder, because she had seen enough. The kiln house wasn't a ruin. It was a womb, and something had just been born. That night the dreams returned, sharper now, brighter. She saw herself kneeling before the clay figure, draped in red, her hands bound with red thread. She saw the elders chanting around her, their mouths stitched closed. She saw her grandmother weeping silently behind a curtain of fire. And in the shadows, the faceless groom approached, not walking, but gliding. When she awoke, her pillow was damp, not with sweat, but with clay, gray, sticky, fingerprinted, as if someone had touched her while she slept, as if someone had molded her face.
Leland's grandmother lit candles before dawn, 3 of them, black wax, no flames. She turned the wicks with a bone needle, whispering words in a tongue Leland did not recognize. Her hands trembled with each syllable, as though every sound carried weight too heavy for breath. The smoke from the hearth refused to rise. It circled low, hugging the floor like something searching. It had been 2 days since Leland opened the kiln house, 2 days since the dreams began, 2 days since the whispers stopped waiting for night. Now they came during the day, fluttering behind her ears, curling beneath her hair, repeating her name in voices not quite human. She hadn't eaten. Her lips were cracked, her eyes rimmed with shadows, but she couldn't stop now. She needed answers. She needed truth. "Grandmother?" she said quietly. The old woman did not stop her chanting. "Why did you lie to me?" The room stilled. Even the fire paused. Her grandmother slowly looked up. There was no anger in her eyes, only exhaustion, and something else, grief. "You weren't ready to carry it," she said. "Carry what?" "The truth." "Then speak it, please." The old woman stared at her for a long time, then gestured to the straw mat beside her. Leland sat. "What you saw in the kiln," she began, "was not new. That room has birthed grooms for over 300 years, and always they are made for one bride, one girl, the firstborn daughter of Sanfeng." Leland's breath caught. "The firstborn? Always?" "Always." "Why?" "Because the village made a pact with something that does not forget." Her grandmother told her everything. Long ago, before even her grandmother's grandmother was born, Sanfeng was not cursed. It was prosperous, blessed by the rivers, guarded by temples. The villagers were proud and pious, but pride invites insult, and insult invites vengeance. A traveling Taoist sorcerer came to Sanfeng during the 7th month one year. He was young, but his power was feared. He claimed to carry spirits in jars, to know the names of the wind, to walk between breaths. He asked for sanctuary, a place to rest for 3 nights. But the village elder refused him. He was dirty, the elder said, unpure, a trickster. The sorcerer left without protest, but as he passed through the gate, he turned once and whispered something to the wind. That night the moon disappeared. The next morning a child was found dead. By the 3rd night, every mirror in the village had cracked. By the 7th, the dead refused to stay buried. The villagers begged for forgiveness. The Taoist never returned. Instead, something else came, a spirit with no name, bound in shadows and thread. It entered through the well. It poisoned the rice. It whispered to the children and waited for them to answer. And when they did, they never woke. The elders pleaded with the mountain gods, but none listened. So they turned to the bones. They dug up the remains of the first girls who had died, children no older than 7, and asked them what the spirit wanted. The bones did not speak, but the clay moved. The spirit demanded a bride, one every generation, a bride made of flesh paired to a groom made of clay, sealed with jade and joined in silence. In return, the spirit would sleep, the fields would grow, the deaths would stop. And so, the pact was made. Each generation, the firstborn daughter would be marked, not with ink, but with breath. They would know her by the weight in her dreams, the ache in her bones during the 7th month, the way shadows clung to her no matter how bright the day. She would be the clay bride. She would sleep beside the dead.
she would keep the village breathing. Lilan sat frozen. "And if she refuses?" she asked. Her grandmother's voice dropped. "Then the spirit wakes, and it does not wake alone." That night, Lilan ran. Not far, not fast, just outside, where the fog lingered like ash and the bamboo groves hissed softly in the windless dark. She looked up. The stars were gone. Only one thing moved above, one single paper lantern drifting overhead, carried by no hands. It passed above her house, over the fields, and into the trees. It left no light behind, only silence. And from the earth beneath her feet, a sound rose, a slow, deep exhale, not from a beast, not from the wind, but from the ground itself, as if something buried had sighed, as if something ancient had felt her fear, and smiled. Back inside, her grandmother had prepared a bowl, water, salt, one drop of blood from Lilan's thumb. The surface rippled, her face appeared, blurred, fractured, distorted by time. And behind her, once more, the clay groom. Closer now. He no longer waited. He watched. The next morning, the village sent for the monks. The preparations had begun, and the clay had already been shaped. Because the first daughter does not choose. She is chosen. From birth, from breath, from blood. The sun never rose fully on the day the clay groom was made. Instead, the sky hung in a strange amber hue, too dull to be daylight, too warm to be dusk. It painted the village in the color of old fire, casting long shadows that did not match the shapes of what made them. Lilan stood at the edge of the kiln house, barefoot on the cold earth. Her breath curled in the morning air, even though it was summer. Her heart pounded in her chest like a war drum, but no sound escaped her lips. She had been summoned, and she knew what that meant. The monks had arrived at dawn. Not the kind who preached or prayed. These wore robes of faded gray, their heads shaved to the skin, their eyes clouded with something that had looked too long into the spirit world. One of them carried a pouch of red dust. Another held a curved blade wrapped in linen. The third said nothing at all, only carried a black lacquered box bound in thread. Lilan's grandmother said nothing as they passed, only bowed. Then, with a heavy breath, she placed a red thread in Lilan's palm and closed her fingers around it. "You must not speak today," she whispered, "or it will enter through your tongue." Inside the kiln house, the clay waited. A lump the size of a child's coffin, dark and wet and pulsing with trapped heat. The room smelled stronger now, of scorched bones and bitter incense, as though centuries of rituals had stained the very air. The monks began their work. They moved silently, with the precision of hands long practiced in secret craft. One sculpted the limbs, arms too long, fingers too thin, veins etched into hardened skin. Another carved the torso, ribs marked with talisman lines, a hollow in the chest prepared to house the spirit's anchor. The last monk shaped the face. It was featureless at first, just smooth clay like untouched flesh. But as he worked, the lines formed slowly, not of his own imagination, but as if something beneath the clay was pushing outward. A nose, a mouth, eyes that were too wide, lips sealed shut, no ears. as though the groom could watch and breathe, but not speak or hear, not unless permitted. By midday, the clay groom stood tall, taller than any man, but bent slightly forward, as if bowing eternally. The monks stepped back. The air thickened. Something unseen had entered the room. Even the shadows stopped moving. Then came the binding. One monk took the curved blade and drew blood from his own palm, smearing it along the groom's spine. Another lit 5 sticks of black incense, planting them at the 5 cardinal points around the figure: north, south, east, west, and center. The smoke turned blue. Then they opened the black lacquered box. Inside was a single jade amulet, no larger than a child's palm, but etched with hundreds of tiny spiraling characters. It pulsed faintly, as if it remembered breath, as if it remembered pain. This, Lilan would later learn, was no ordinary talisman. It was a spirit vessel. Each generation, the monks carried it to Sanfeng, the same amulet passed down for over 300 years, the same jade used in every wedding, the same object that bound the spirit of the original groom, the one who was never buried, never mourned, only molded. With solemn reverence, the monks placed the jade into the hollowed chest cavity of the groom. Then they sealed it with clay and blood. The moment the last layer was smoothed over, the groom's head tilted slightly, a twitch so subtle that only Lilan saw it. But she did see it, and she knew then it was watching her. The monks began to chant, low, rhythmic, without melody. It was not music, but a vibration, like an old wind pressing against bones. The walls of the kiln groaned softly. The floor felt damp beneath her feet. And as the chanting rose, so too did the heat. The clay groom began to harden, its surface turning from deep brown to pale ash. Steam hissed from its joints. Cracks formed across its arms, but instead of breaking, they glowed faintly green, like veins beneath skin. The kiln fire was never lit. It did not need to be. The spirit inside the amulet had begun to wake. Lilan was led forward. She was not told to kneel, but her knees buckled regardless. She faced the clay groom directly, the space between them thick with incense smoke and silent judgment. One of the monks stepped beside her. He pressed something into her hand. A needle, silver and old. "You must prick your finger," he whispered, "and feed it." Her lips trembled. The monk raised his hand, not in threat, but in warning. Refuse, and the spirit will take it anyway. Better it be offered. With shaking fingers, she pierced the skin at the tip of her index finger. A drop of blood welled, bright, warm. She touched it to the groom's clay chest. The instant blood met hardened earth, the groom's eyes darkened, not opened, but deepened, as if something behind them blinked once, unseen. A low hum filled the room, and in her head, not in her ears, she heard a sound, not a word, but a promise. That night, the villagers lit red lanterns across the shrine path. No one spoke. Children were not allowed to cry. Doors were barred, windows covered, and bowls of rice were left on thresholds with chopsticks stabbed upright. a sign that the living had no place at the table that night. Only the dead would eat. And in the center of the village, in the bridal chamber long sealed and recently opened, the clay groom sat beneath a crimson veil, waiting for her. Lilan did not sleep. She lay in silence, staring at the ceiling, listening to the breath of the clay figure beside her, though it had no lungs. Its presence filled the room like water in a sealed jar, heavy, inescapable. Somewhere in the dark, incense burned, the red candle flickered, and from deep inside the groom's chest, the jade pulsed in rhythm with her heartbeat. Only hers, as if it had synchronized, as if it had learned her rhythm. And in the stillness, she understood. He was not made for her. She was made for him.
The seventh night had come, the night of veils, the night of offerings, the night when the dead crossed the threshold of the living, not as shadows, but as guests. In Sanfeng, no bells were rung on wedding nights, no firecrackers split the silence, no songs were sung. Only one sound echoed through the village paths, the soft rustling of silk robes and the solemn thud of the red umbrella staff striking stone. Lilan walked in silence, veiled in crimson from head to toe, her hands clasped together over her stomach, knuckles white against the tension in her bones. Every step echoed louder in her mind than on the earth. Behind her, the procession moved slowly, monks, elders, and 7 chosen villagers, all barefoot, all dressed in mourning white, all expressionless, as if they had traded their souls for quiet. The red umbrella swayed just ahead, held by a boy whose face she did not recognize. He was young, far too young, with black thread stitched across his lips, sewn shut, as was tradition, because no one was permitted to speak once the veil was drawn, not even the bride, especially not the bride. They walked the long path through the village center, where every door had been sealed with salt and ash. No one watched from the windows, no animal stirred, not even the wind dared breathe through the trees. Above, the sky was a colorless void, no stars, no moon, only cloud and silence. The path ended at the Ancestral hall, a place that had not seen daylight in years. Inside, it was colder than the grave. Candles lined the walls, each flame flickering without smoke. The air was thick with the scent of sandalwood, wormwood, and something else, something metallic, ancient, like rusted coins and dried blood. At the center of the hall sat the groom. The clay effigy had been dressed in ceremonial robes, black threaded with gold, embroidered with symbols of binding, eternity, and silence. A crown of burnt red twine rested on his head. His hands lay folded in his lap. But his posture had changed. Now he sat straighter, and his head tilted just enough to suggest listening, waiting, watching. Lilan walked in forward. The monk guided her without touch, only gesture. She approached the groom and stopped 3 steps away. A drum sounded once, a deep, low thud that came not from an instrument, but from beneath the floor. It signaled the vows. Lilan bowed, once, twice, 3 times. Her knees hit the stone. The monk placed a red thread between her hands and tied it in a perfect loop, connecting her wrists, binding her silence. Another monk stepped forward with a ceramic bowl. Inside was the bridal blood ink,
a mixture of ash, animal blood, and a single drop of her own collected the night before. He dipped a brush into it and painted a mark across her veil, a spiral that pulsed faintly as it dried. This mark, she had been told, was a symbol of sealing. From this moment onward, her spirit was no longer her own. The final ritual was the lighting of the bed flame. In the bridal chamber beyond the hall, 2 candles had been prepared, one for the bride, one for the groom. They would be lit together and only extinguished on the 3rd night. Li Lan followed the monk into the chamber. It was smaller than she expected. No windows, no furniture, just a stone floor, a wooden platform draped in red silk, and 2 pillows, one clay, one cotton. The groom was already there, placed at the head of the bed, facing the door, silent. The monk lit both candles, bowed low, and left without a word. The door closed. A final click, the sound of a lock being turned. Li Lan stood frozen in the center of the room. She could hear her own breathing under the veil, too fast, too loud. Her heart raced in her chest like something trying to claw its way out. She walked slowly toward the bed. The candles cast strange shadows on the wall, long and twitching, as if unsure whether they were hers or not. The groom's clay face flickered in the light. His eyes, once empty, now seemed to reflect more than wax. She sat on the edge of the bed. The silk rustled beneath her. It smelled of old incense and dust. The groom made no sound, but the air had shifted. Something was no longer outside. It was here. Hours passed. She lay beside him, not touching, not moving, her body trembling beneath the veil. The candle burned low. She dared not look at the figure beside her, not directly, not after midnight. That was the rule. Never look after midnight, because it is no longer just clay after midnight. Somewhere outside, an owl called, then choked, and went silent. The candle flickered, and Li Lan felt it, a weight pressing down beside her, not from the clay, but from something inside it. Breathing, not loudly, but enough. She held her breath. The room felt smaller. The veil clung tighter to her face. Then faintly, so faintly, she heard it. A sound, not a voice, a murmur, a rasp, a whisper. But it came from inside her head. You are mine now. The candle flared, the veil lifted slightly, her vision blurred, and for one moment, just one, she saw the groom turn his head. She shut her eyes, tightly, and waited until sleep, or something like it, took her. And in the dreams that followed, she was not alone. There was always someone standing just behind her, never touching, never speaking, but always there.
On the first night, Li Lan slept without moving. The silence of the bridal chamber was suffocating. She kept her back to the clay figure, eyes shut so tightly they burned. The red candle glowed dim beside her, its flame flickering without wind. She did not sleep so much as drift, in and out of stillness, floating through a sea of whispers that seemed to come from the cracks in the wall. At times, she heard her name spoken in a voice that sounded like her own. Other times, it came from beneath the bed. But she did not look, because she remembered the rule: never open your eyes after midnight. On the second night, the candle burned lower. The air in the room felt heavier, as if the walls had drawn closer. The silk sheets clung to her like skin. Her fingers had gone numb. The breath of the clay groom was still, not audible, not visible, but present, pressing against her thoughts, watching her mind instead of her face. She felt a pressure near her spine, like someone was tracing a finger along her back without touching her. Her chest grew tight, her heartbeat slow. And then, for a single heart-stopping moment, she felt a hand brush her cheek. It was cold and damp. But when she opened her eyes, she saw only the candle, still burning, still flickering, still waiting. Now it was the third night, the final night of the ritual, the night the spirit either settled or claimed. Outside, the village had gone silent again. The fog had thickened to the point that even the moon could not pierce it. The red lanterns had been extinguished, the doors sealed. This was the night of decision. Lilan lay on the bed, her body unmoving, her breath shallow. The candle had burned halfway. The clay groom sat at the head of the bed, just inches away. His hands, once folded, were now resting on his knees, and his head was tilted toward her, more than before, as if studying her, as if listening to thoughts she had not spoken aloud. The silence was no longer still. It pulsed, a deep, rhythmic beat like a heartbeat that did not belong to her own. It echoed through the stone floor, through her spine, through her skull. Then came the sound, faint, wet, like something shifting in mud. She turned her face just slightly toward the clay figure and stopped. There was dirt on the floor. Fresh mud pooled beneath the groom, still dripping, as if he had gone somewhere and returned. Her breath caught. She sat up slowly. The candle trembled beside her. The groom remained still, but the floor told a different story. Footprints, trailing away from the bed, leading to the far wall, and back. Her gaze followed the trail and froze. There, on the wall, written in thin streaks of clay and ash, were 5 characters, not drawn, not painted, scratched by hand. They read, "Do not unseal the chest." Lilan stumbled back. She stared at the clay figure. Its chest, though sealed with blood and mud, now had a long, thin crack across the surface, barely visible, but pulsing. The jade was glowing beneath it, like a second heartbeat. She stepped toward it, her hand raised, trembling, compelled, drawn. The crack widened slightly as her fingers hovered above it. She did not know why she did it, only that something inside her whispered that she must. Not a voice, but a memory. She pressed her palm to the chest. The clay burned, then cracked. A deep sound like bones splitting underwater echoed through the chamber, and the chest broke open. The jade amulet fell forward, landing in her hand. It was warm, too warm, and as it touched her skin, the whispers stopped. Silence, real silence, the kind that rings in your ears. Then, the candle extinguished, instantly. No smoke, no wind, just darkness. Absolute. Lilan froze. The room was not empty. She could feel breath against her ear. Close, closer.
Then a voice, not hers, not human. You broke the seal. Hands, too many, grabbed her from the dark, not violently, gently, like a groom lifting a veil. They brushed her cheeks, her shoulders, her lips. She screamed, but no sound came. The walls of the room pulsed with invisible mouths whispering prayers in reverse. She was lifted from the floor, weightless, suspended in air. And for one moment, just one, she opened her eyes. She saw the clay groom standing beside her. No longer clay, but flesh. Not a man, not a ghost, something between. His face was her face, stretched, smiling, cracked. Then she fell. When she awoke, it was morning. Light seeped through the cracks in the wooden door. The chamber was empty. The groom was gone. Only the red candle remained, burned to nothing. And in her hand, the jade amulet, still glowing, still pulsing. But now, it was cold, as if waiting for a new home. She stood, legs shaking. The door was unlocked. Outside, the hall was silent again. No one waited, no villagers, no monks. Just a single note pinned to the shrine door, scrawled in ink that smeared like tears. It is done, but not ended. Li Lan did not return home after leaving the ancestral hall. She did not know why, only that her body refused to turn toward the village, as if something inside her had shifted, a compass now pointing somewhere else. Her bare feet moved on their own, numb from cold, trailing mud across the cracked stone path. The jade amulet pulsed faintly in her palm. Its glow had dimmed with daylight, but it remained warm, as if holding breath. Each step she took made her feel further away from herself. She passed the old watermill. It had not turned in years. She passed the shrine bell. It had not rung in decades. And when she reached the footbridge overlooking the rice fields, she stopped, because the crows had returned. They circled above the village, dozens of them, but none landed. They only watched. And Li Lan knew then, something had been undone. By nightfall, she was back inside her grandmother's house, but it no longer felt like shelter. The talismans on the walls had blackened. The salt on the floor had dissolved into strange patterns, not circles, but spirals. The hearth was cold. The door creaked open behind her without wind, and her grandmother was not there. Only a bowl of water left on the table. She approached it. Floating inside was a single lock of her hair, tied with red thread, and a note beneath the bowl, written in her grandmother's slanted hand. Do not trust the light. It walks with his name now. Li Lan clutched the jade tightly. She needed answers. If this was the heart of the curse, the soul of the clay groom, then perhaps destroying it would end everything, break the chain, free her family, free herself. That night, she took the jade and a hammer and went to the only place where curses were born, the kiln house. It was darker than she remembered. The door had been left open. The clay figures were still inside, more of them now, dozens, all standing, all facing inward in a circle around the central platform. And on that platform, something waited. Not the groom, but a mirror, cracked, veiled in red,
covered in dust. As she entered, the figures trembled, only slightly, as if breathing in unison. She stepped into the center and held the jade high. The clay whispered, not words, but grief, a low hum of sorrow like wind through bones. Lilan raised the hammer, but her hand froze because the mirror had cleared and reflected not her image, but her mother's face, mouth sewn shut, eyes black with ink, hands pressed against glass, silently pleading. Then her grandmother's face appeared behind her, then her father's, then her younger sister's. All of them trapped behind the mirror, all of them reaching, clawing, drowning in silence. And the jade pulsed louder, as if it fed on the pain. Tears spilled from Lilan's eyes. She closed them and brought the hammer down. The jade cracked with a sound like thunder beneath earth. The clay figure screamed. A soundless wail erupted across the kiln like air being sucked from the world. The mirror shattered. The red veil burst into flame, and every clay figure turned to face her. They moved, not as people, but as puppets, their joints bending wrong, necks tilting too far, mouths opening into darkness. They circled her slowly, their chests cracked open. Each one contained a piece of jade. Each one began to glow. She stumbled backward, the broken jade shard still warm in her hand. Blood trickled from her palm. The clay reacted. It moved toward the blood, drawn to it, hungry. She ran. Out of the kiln, through the fields, into the forest. The ground beneath her felt soft, wrong, as if it remembered being something else, as if it remembered being flesh. She didn't stop until she reached the edge of the village. There she found the temple bell. She struck it, once. The sound rang hollow. The bell cracked. And from the trees behind her, a whisper slithered through the branches. You broke the vessel, but not the vow. She turned and saw the clay groom standing at the edge of the trees. No longer cracked, no longer lifeless, he was whole again. His face was no longer hers. It was 100 faces, all layered, all shifting. The brides of Sanfeng, all those who came before her. Their eyes blinked in unison, and their mouths moved together. You belong to the earth now, to the vow, to me. Lilan fell to her knees. The jade in her hand melted into her skin, searing a mark into her palm. She screamed, and the clay groom smiled, not with his mouth, but with his silence. Because in Sanfeng, silence is the loudest vow of all.
The morning that followed was not a morning. There was no light, only a sickly grayness that seeped from the ground and coated the village like ash. The fog hung lower now, almost touching the rooftops, curling between door frames like searching hands. Lilan returned to the village with blood on her palm, and the broken jade fused into her skin. Her breath felt heavy, like each inhalation dragged threads behind it, invisible strings that tugged at something far away and deep below. She passed the shrine. The incense bowls were overturned. The red lanterns had burned out, leaving only blackened husks that swayed without wind. There were no voices, no footsteps, no chickens, no dogs, no children. Just silence. The kind of silence that feels like it's waiting. Her house stood just as she left it.
At first glance, nothing had changed. The door was closed. The roof still held. The garden had not withered. But the air was wrong. Flat, cold, hollowed out. She stepped inside and saw them. Her family was in the ancestral room, all kneeling, perfectly still. Her grandmother, her father, her younger sister. Their heads bowed, their hands clasped in front of them, holding bundles of dry clay and red thread, and their mouths sewn shut. Thick, black thread, pulled tight, pierced deep, as if sealing something in or something out. Their eyes were open, but not seeing. And worst of all, they were smiling. Lilan dropped to her knees. She screamed, she begged, she shook her sister. Her sister did not move. Only the doll in her hand slipped and hit the floor. It was shaped like a bride, with a face molded to match Lilan's own. She backed away, heart racing, stomach heaving. She looked toward the corner of the room, and there, painted on the wall in old ash, were the spirals. The same spirals from the kiln, the same ones from the amulet. They moved, not quickly, not visibly, but she felt it. A slow, pulsing motion, as if something on the other side of the wall were breathing against the paint. She turned and fled into the kitchen. The pots were full of ash. The hearth had been extinguished. On the table sat 3 bowls of rice, perfectly placed, and in the center of each bowl, a single clay tooth. Outside, the fog began to hum. It vibrated at the edges, like wind trapped between glass and bone. Lilan stepped out of the house. The village had shifted. The homes no longer looked empty. They looked abandoned, like shells that once held people, but now hosted something else. She walked past the schoolhouse. The windows were scratched, the doors gone. Inside, small chairs sat arranged around an altar that hadn't been there before. At its center, a clay effigy of a bride and groom, draped in red, eyes hollow, hands reaching. At the edge of the village, she found the well. It had been sealed shut with stone, but the seal had cracked. From within, water did not rise. Only voices, soft, childlike, repeating her name, not in accusation, but in invitation. She ran to the elder's house. The gates were wide open. Inside, every wall had been covered in mirrors, all shattered, each shard showing a different version of her face, some smiling, some weeping, one bleeding from the eyes, and all of them mouthing the same word, why? In the courtyard, the elders sat, dressed in wedding white, blindfolded, mouths sealed with wax, hands holding jars filled with red-threaded hair. One by one, they turned toward her, slowly, and though they made no sound, she heard them speak, inside her skull. You broke the pact. You opened the seal. You turned the vow into a wound. Now we bleed. Lilan stumbled backward. She pressed her hands to her ears, but the voices were inside now, woven into her breath. She fled the house, into the fields, into the fog, and behind her, the village began to change. The rooftops bent, the doors swelled, the windows blinked. It was no longer Sanfeng. It was a mouth, and she was still inside. By sunset, the fog glowed red, not from the sun, but from flame. Somewhere, the kiln had relit itself. Smoke rose into the air, and with it, the smell of burning silk. She returned home one last time. Only ashes remained. Her family was gone. Only clay footprints marked the floor, and a red veil hung carefully over the altar, waiting. That night, Lilan stood in the center of the village, alone. The bells did not ring. The drums did not sound, but somewhere beneath her feet, the earth exhaled, and the whisper returned. The bride broke the bond. The groom walks again.
Lilan ran until the village disappeared behind her. She ran until the fog no longer breathed against her back, until the cracked stones of Sanfeng gave way to moss-covered roots and winding, root-choked trails. She didn't stop to cry. She didn't stop to pray. She just ran. Because something had been released, and now it walked freely, not bound by walls or salt or thread. It walked wearing the faces of her family. It walked without weight. It walked where her shadow used to be. By midnight, she was deep in the mountain. The forest here was different, older. The trees leaned toward one another as if whispering secrets between bark. Their roots split the earth in tangled veins that pulsed faintly beneath the soil. No birds called here. No wind passed through the canopy. Only the sound of her own blood loud in her ears, and beneath that, something quieter. Footsteps, not behind her, but below. She collapsed near a stream with no source. The water was dark and motionless. She drank anyway. And when she wiped her lips, she saw red, not from her mouth, but from the stream itself. It had turned to ink, and beneath its surface, a face watched her. Not her own, not the groom's, a third face, smiling. She followed the stream upward. The trees became thinner, and at the edge of a stone outcrop, lit by pale fireflies, she saw a figure seated cross-legged beneath a withered pine. An old man, draped in gray robes, his eyes milky white, his mouth moving without sound. Lilan stepped closer, heart racing, and he raised one hand, silencing the world. He did not look at her, but he saw her. "You are the last breath of a pact long broken," he said, without moving his lips. She fell to her knees. "Help me." "You have already passed through the veil. There is no help, only balance." "What did I break?" "Not what. Who?" The monk placed a bundle of smoldering leaves beside her. The smoke curled upward, twisting into shapes, faces, bones, spirals. He spoke through the flames. "Long ago, before Sanfeng built its first house, the mountain belonged to the river, and the river belonged to the old spirits, those who did not wear names, only hunger. The villagers feared the drought, so they made a vow, a bride every generation. But one man defied it, a Taoist, proud and defiant.
He sealed the river's spirit into clay, bound it with jade, and declared it conquered. But you cannot conquer what you invite. He gave it shape, he gave it blood, and when he died, it wore his name, the first groom. Lilon trembled. So it was never a ghost. Not a ghost, a God-starved thing, not dead, not living, made real by belief and sacrifice. And each bride feeds it, each silence strengthens it. You broke the vessel, but now it seeks a new shape, one of flesh, one it can wear forever. She looked at her palm. The jade had fused deeper now, veins spreading from it in greenish-black tendrils. Her skin felt tight, warped. "Is it inside me?" "Not yet," the monk said, "but it will be, unless you give it what it wants." "And what does it want?" "Not your soul, your remembrance." The monk drew a symbol in the dirt, an eye, a mouth, a hand. Then he drew a circle around it. "You must go to the source, the unmarked grave in the forest of ash, where the first clay was molded, where the curse began. There you must complete the vow, not with fear, but with blood willing." Lilon's breath shook. "I don't want to die." "You already have. You are only what's left." She looked up and saw that the monk was no longer there. Only the robes, folded, unmoving. She stood, alone, and behind her the forest had changed again. The trees had opened into a path, a narrow trail of stone and bone, leading deeper into the mountain, where no birds called, where no insects lived, where the river no longer flowed, only whispers and ash. She followed, and the fog followed her, and somewhere far behind, the clay groom smiled, because she was going exactly where it needed her to go.
The path led her where no paths should go. The deeper Lilon walked, the less the forest resembled anything human. The trees had thinned to twisted spires. The air was dry, brittle as paper. The soil was no longer black, but pale, bone-colored dust that crumbled beneath her feet. There were no animal tracks, no bird droppings, no signs of rain, only ash. As if fire had once devoured this place and memory refused to rebuild. She walked for hours without the sun. Time blurred. The jade fused to her palm was now completely embedded in her flesh, green veins ballooning up her wrist like moss. It no longer pulsed. It simply hummed, a low, endless vibration in her bones. Every now and then she heard laughter. Not close, not loud, but soft, childlike, echoing from trees that had no leaves. Whispers rode the windless air. They spoke in tongues older than language, not calling her name, calling her role. Bride, bearer, blood. At the end of the path, she found it, a field of unmarked graves. No stones, no prayers, no names. Only mounds of earth, carefully spaced, forming a circle around a single clearing in the center. A pit filled with cracked clay, shattered red veils, rotted bridal robes, and half-burned scrolls. She stepped into the circle, and the world grew silent. Even her thoughts seemed to still. It felt like walking into the mouth of something asleep, something waiting to be fed.
In the center of the pit, she saw a stone altar, plain, unmarked, ancient. Atop it, a bridal comb carved from bone, and beneath it, carved into the earth itself, spirals. The same spirals, always the spirals. Li Lan knelt. She did not know what to do, but her body remembered. Somewhere deep in her blood, the pact had already been written. She placed her hands on the altar. The jade in her palm sizzled. A voice, not hers, spoke from her lips. Low, cracked, timeless. Not a chant, a contract. I give what was taken. I bind what was broken. I offer blood willing for silence eternal. The ground responded. It shook softly like a breath drawn in after drowning, and from beneath the altar a hand emerged, not living, not rotted, but made of clay, wet, fresh. It reached for her wrist and held it gently, then turned her palm upward, and the jade bloomed open, splitting like a seed, revealing a single black thread soaked in old blood. It slithered around her fingers, her arm, her throat. It did not choke. It connected, bound her to the altar, to the pit, to the past. She did not resist, because this was the price. To break the cycle, she must finish the wedding, one that was never completed, one that had waited for a bride who understood, not fear, but purpose. She lay upon the cracked clay. The veil formed around her, woven by invisible hands. The comb slid into her hair, and the ground beneath her grew warm. The hand remained at her side, and from the shadows, the groom returned. He was no longer a figure of clay. He was every groom that had ever been made. Every face layered over the next, every mouth sealed, every eye watching. He knelt beside her and did not speak, because the pact was never spoken, it was only felt. He reached for her chest and placed his hand above her heart. A second hand emerged from the earth and pressed into her stomach. A third touched her forehead, and she felt it all. The grief of generations, the pain of every girl who had been offered, without choice, without voice. The silence passed through her like wind through an empty shrine, and in that moment, she understood. The curse had never been about punishment. It was about containment. The first groom had been a sorcerer, broken, betrayed, sealed in clay by his own failed ritual. But the villagers had made it worse. They fed it, named it, worshipped it, bound it to brides who were never told the truth. And so it grew, not out of malice, but out of inheritance. Li Lan whispered the final words, not from memory, but from instinct. I do not offer myself. I return what was borrowed. Let the earth close. Let the silence settle. Let the pact end here. The ground opened, and she sank, slowly, calmly, as if returning to a place she had never left, as if the mountain had always held a space for her. The last thing she saw was the groom's face, no longer shifting, no longer broken, just one face, his own, tearless, silent. And then, darkness. Somewhere above, the wind began to move again. The trees rustled, the ash lifted, and the graves disappeared.
Only the altar remained, covered in moss, unmoving.
The forest did not speak of what it swallowed. When Leland sank beneath the altar, the ash above her smoothed itself out. The wind stilled again. The grave mounds faded back into the landscape, like breath disappearing from a mirror. No one saw her go. No one followed, because no one who had witnessed the original vow was still alive, and the ones who had returned no longer remembered how to mourn. She descended not through dirt or stone, but through memory. The earth beneath the altar was not earth. It was hollow, warm, breathing. The walls pulsed around her with the rhythm of ancient blood. Faint whispers moved in spirals, echoing from every direction. She was not falling. She was being lowered, cradled like an offering held by invisible hands. Below her, light glowed from no source. A fire that cast no flame. A lantern made from bones. A bridal chamber buried at the end of the world. When she landed, her feet touched stone. She stood inside a vast cavern lined with mirrors, but none reflected her. Each pane shimmered with visions of other brides, some weeping, some kneeling, some turned to ash mid-vow. The room had no roof, only roots above, tangled and veined, dripping water that hissed when it hit the stone. At the center was a shallow pit. Carved into it the spirals, and beside it a bridal altar of red lacquer, adorned with black candles, burnt incense, and a silk pillow that still bore the imprint of a human head. This was the heart of the vow, where it all began, where it must now end. Leland walked to the pit. The jade in her palm had cracked open entirely, its shards now fused to her veins. Her body trembled with heat. Her mouth was dry, but her tongue moved on its own. The words were not hers. They came from the blood, from the memory, from the pact. I am the last of the bound, of the broken, of the buried. Here I return, the silence you gave, the vow you stole, the name you hid. She stepped into the pit barefoot. The stone was warm, wet, not with water, with breath. She lay down, and the altar behind her responded. The candles flared. The incense turned black. The roots above began to bleed, droplets of red sap falling like tears into the pit. And from the mirrors the brides began to whisper, not with fear, but with relief. Their faces softened. Their mouths finally opened, and from their breath came a single name. Not the groom's, Li Lan. She was no longer a sacrifice. She was the seal. The reversal could only happen once, and only when a bride gave herself knowing what she was, willing, not offered, not chosen, but choosing. The ground rumbled, and the pit filled with flame, but it did not burn. It cleansed. The jade shards in her flesh melted. The thread around her wrist turned to dust. The green veins receded, replaced by pale glowing scars that pulsed once, then faded. And the shadows withdrew, screaming, not in pain, in hunger denied. The pact was ending. The groom had been refused. The vow was now hers. The fire faded. She sat up, alone. The mirrors cracked one by one with soft sighs. The candles died, and from above, light spilled through the roots, moonlight, real and silver, breaking through the roofless earth. The cavern began to close, the chamber fading as if it had never been carved at all, and Leland stood where the pit once was, breathing, alive, whole. She walked out of the forest before dawn. The fog no longer followed her. The soil felt like soil again, and in the distance, Sanfeng village exhaled. Its roof stood still,
Its trees no longer whispered. Its people slept, this time in peace. But not all was quiet. At the very edge of the woods where the altar once stood, a red thread hung from a branch, knotted, unbroken, and below it, half buried in the dirt, something shimmered faintly. A veil, folded, waiting, because every silence leaves behind an echo, and not all vows stay buried.
Lilan returned to Sanfeng just before dawn. Mist still clung to the rooftops, but it no longer pulsed. The trees no longer leaned toward her. The ground, for the first time in days, felt still beneath her feet. But the silence had not left. It had only changed. Now it felt expectant, like a room holding its breath as someone enters. She passed the village gates. The talismans, once blackened with ash, had been restored, bright red, freshly inked, pasted over old paper that still bore claw marks beneath. The shrines had been swept clean, the broken bells rehung, the drums retied with new skins. It looked normal, but she knew better, because Sanfeng had never been normal, and some things don't die when they're buried. They wait. She walked to her home. It stood unchanged, the same crooked doorframe, the same crack along the left wall, the same familiar creak in the floorboards. But when she stepped inside, she found nothing. No grandmother, no sister, no scent of mugwort or incense, only 3 bowls of cold rice on the table, each one filled with salt, and a mirror behind them, small, uncracked, but covered with a thin cloth. She did not lift it. She knew what would stare back. At the ancestral hall, the villagers had gathered, not speaking, not chanting, just waiting. They stood in a circle around the altar, dressed not in mourning white, but in wedding red, all of them, even the children, even the elders. They did not look at her as she entered, but they sensed her, as if she were a flame walking into a room filled with dry leaves. At the center of the hall stood a new bridal platform, raised, freshly carved, still damp with lacquer. And seated atop it was a girl, veiled, small, still. Lilan stepped closer. The red silk lifted in the breeze, and her breath caught. It was her sister, dressed in the same bridal robe Lilan had worn, hands bound in red thread, eyes open, not afraid, only waiting. She turned to the villagers. "Why?" No one answered, not with words, but their heads tilted in unison, and she understood. The pact was broken, but the memory of the vow remained. The silence had been lifted, but the shape of it, the habit, the fear, the expectation, still lingered like smoke in old cloth. Without the spirit, the village still craved a ritual, and so they had chosen another bride, because Sanfeng did not know how to exist without sacrifice. It only knew how to kneel. Lilan approached the platform. Her sister blinked once, not in fear, in recognition. She whispered her name, but the girl said nothing, because her mouth had been sealed with thread. She pulled the veil away and saw her own face reflected in the child's eyes, not as she was, but as she had been, just before the clay whispered, just before the jade burned, just before she broke the vow, a girl who still believed silence was safety. The groom was not present. There was no clay figure, no effigy, no spirit, only absence. But that absence had grown teeth. It had become its own shape, and now the village fed it, willingly. Lilan backed away. She turned from the altar. She walked through the crowd. No one stopped her. No one looked at her.
and yet she felt every eye, open or not, turning as she passed, watching, always watching. At the edge of the village she paused. The mist had lifted completely. The trees no longer whispered. The air was clear. But in the silence, she heard breathing. Not hers, not the wind's. It came from beneath, from the earth itself. Still remembering, still listening. She turned back once and saw the village standing still, her sister seated, eyes wide, unblinking. And from the shrine roof, a single red thread hung down, gently swaying. It brushed the doorway like a finger. Lilan stepped into the forest again. She did not run, she did not cry. She simply walked, because she understood now. The spirit had been sealed, but Sanfeng was not cursed by a ghost. It was cursed by habit. And some rituals don't need a god, only people willing to repeat them. Behind her, the village bell rang, once, then again, then a third time. The sound echoed far into the trees and faded, but it did not end, because some eyes never close, and some veils never fall.
The wheel always turns. Even when shattered, even when buried, it turns. The fog came back to Sanfeng on the 7th day of the 7th month, just as it always did. It rose before dawn, thick, pale, soundless. And this time, no one tried to stop it, because they no longer feared it. They expected it. They welcomed it. The red umbrella was carried again, down the stone path, through the silent village, past doors marked with ash, past rooftops draped with mourning silk, past shrines where the incense burned sideways. There was no music, only the soft drag of silk across dirt. Only the creak of the wooden sedan chair, and a girl walking behind it. She was veiled in red, her hands folded, her steps small. She did not speak, she did not cry, because she had been taught not to, because no one told her there was another way. Inside the ancestral hall, the platform had been prepared. The clay effigy returned, new, perfect, larger than life. But there was no jade inside it now, no spirit, only ritual, only expectation. And perhaps that was enough. Perhaps it always had been. The villagers stood in a circle, dressed in red and gray, holding sticks of unlit incense, their mouths unmoving, their eyes unfocused, their memories stitched together by repetition. This was what the ancestors wanted, they whispered. This was tradition. This was safety. The girl was led forward. The veil was lowered. The thread bound her wrists. 3 bows to the clay figure, one for the earth, one for the dead, one for the silence that held them both. She was placed in the chamber beside the effigy. The candle was lit, and the door was closed. Outside, the sky held no moon, only stars, blinking, watching, and far beyond the village, deep in the trees, someone watched too. A woman, grown, worn, quiet. Lilan stood at the edge of the forest, face bare, hands empty, eyes open. She did not approach. She did not intervene. She only watched, because she understood now.
The pact had not been broken, not truly. She had sealed the spirit, but not the system, not the fear, not the need to appease something, even if that something no longer breathed. The village did not need a god anymore. It needed a ghost. So they made one, again and again and again. She turned to leave. The wind shifted. The veil in the chamber flickered, and the clay groom tilted its head, just slightly, just enough. From the edge of the world, Leland whispered one last time, not to the girl, not to the villagers, but to the ground, to the place where silence is planted like seed. I see you, I remember, and I will not return. But behind her, the fog thickened. The bell rang once, and from the mouth of the kiln, the clay began to whisper, again. Because some echoes never fade, some doors never truly close, and in Sanfeng, the clay bride always returns.